central banking that distorted the economy, that got people to loan money that never should have been loaned, got people to gamble when the free market would have prevented it. And Obama is continuing those failed policies.
But doesn't that have a lot to do with the extent that the private sector controls the federal government? Well, like these policies weren't happening in a vacuum.
Well, no, I do agree that there are large businesses that are able to, get regulations passed.
Well, we know the Fed is mostly private bankers.
Well, like, for example, look, I own a brokerage firm, right? And I am struggling to survive all these rules and regulations that cost me a fortune. Now, why are those rules and regulations there? Because some of the largest brokerage firms in the country want them there. Because having all these regulations makes it harder for smaller firms to compete with these gigantic firms that have the economies of scale to handle all the regulatory burden. Smaller firms can't do it. So you do have certain special interests that control Washington, but that's not capitalism. You can call it fascism or corporatism, but it's not a free market. But the problem rests in Washington. What we need to do is remove all these barriers to production and economic growth. Right now we're running an economy that's all we do is borrow money and spend it.
You assume that all this sorts of financial adventurism should be allowed to rip, and anything if the government does to get in the way with it is a bad thing. Maybe it shouldn't be done. But we've also seen the last couple of decades, finance has been able to do pretty much what it wanted. There has been a deregulation of absolutely everything starting in the mid-'70s, just preceded we saw the deregulation of interest rates, late 70s, early 80s. We saw the elimination of all these lines of business regulations. And for the last couple of decades, finance has been able to do pretty much what it wanted to. There's been a proliferation of independent hedge funds, the shadow banking system. These are all pretty, some of these are fairly small entities. There's been no inhibition of innovation or the creation of financial entities. They've been able to do whatever they wanted to.
Congress has spent the last decade writing legislation, not repealing it. I mean, these guys are passing one law after another. To say that we have less regulation now than we had a decade ago or a generation ago is preposterous.
It is not preposterous.
Speak to a small businessman. Businesses are shutting down in this country every day because they can't survive the cost of the regulations. That's the reason we're so uncompetitive.
How did the housing bubble get so inflated? Part of it was that banks were allowed to create completely opaque securities.
It was because the government guaranteed the mortgages. Why was Freddie and Fannie guaranteeing mortgages? And why was the Federal Reserve giving away money at 1%? That's why we had a housing bubble.
Let him answer what you said.
I'm not going to deny that we have a system of socialism for the rich in this country. And it's a very toxic combination of allowing finance to do whatever it wants to in an expansion and then bail them out when they go bust. I think that we had to have some kind of financial bailout or the financial system would have imploded. Ben Bernanke made his academic reputation studying the Great Depression and its financial mechanisms and the propagation of it. It's what made the Great Depression great, was that the 10,000 banks collapsed, and he wanted to prevent a rerun of it. Nobody with any kind of responsibility or any kind of human sympathy would want to let this process of bankruptcy and failure run to the point where you get a 25% unemployment rate like we had in 1932.
We're at 18% now, or 17%.
We're talking about comparing by the same definition. What we have now is almost 10%. It would be 25 if we were going to rerun the Great Depression.
No, but I'm saying
no one wants to let that process run because it's cruel and destructive and would also result in a great deal of political turmoil. And if we had a capitalist class that was capable of thinking beyond the next quarter or the next next week's profit report, they would be aware of the fact that they have to stabilize the system for their own sake. Otherwise, the whole thing is going to crash in.
Unfortunately, because we are following this Keynesian model of stimulus, we're going to have something worse than the Great Depression. We're going to have more people unemployed, but the unemployed and the employed alike are going to watch their cost of living run up because we're going to have runaway inflation.
Okay, let's deal with the issue of that.
In a depression.
The people that have agreed with your economic theory have been predicting hyperinflation and inflation for at least a couple of years, if not longer. Where is it?
Well, you're seeing it. Look at the price of gold is at an all-time record high. Silver's at a 30-year high. The dollar is hitting record lows against a number of foreign currencies.
But we haven't seen it, but in terms of prices, we have not really.
Corn prices are up 60%
But actual consumer prices are on the verge of deflation.
No, they're not. Consumer prices are rising.
Look at the example of Japan. Japan is now in deflation and has been in deflation for quite a while. And they spent just the same way the United States has been spending. They had a massive Bank of Japan bailout, that massive stimulus spending, and they still have inflation.
Given the economic contraction that we've had, consumer prices should have fallen substantially, and that would have been very helpful to the economy if we could have brought down the cost of living. Not just housing prices coming down, but if we had food prices coming down and energy prices coming down, that would have been a plus. And the reason that prices didn't fall is the government created all this inflation, and so it prevented prices from falling, and that's distorting the economy. But ultimately, it's not just going to be that inflation prevents prices from falling. It's going to send them ballistic, and that is coming. Just because you haven't seen it yet, you can't. If you're looking for a train, you can't wait to see the caboose to realize that the train is coming. You got to move out of the way long before the caboose comes, and you're going to see much higher consumer prices. They're going to be spiraling out of control. It's going to be worse than anything we saw in the 1970s, and we are not in a position now to do anything about it, because how is the Federal Reserve going to substantially tighten money supply, increase interest rates, when it's got the federal government with $14–15 trillion national debt as an adjustable rate mortgage financed with treasury bills? It's got all the banks leveraged up.
If you read the business press, and you even listen, for example, to interviews with the Chinese Prime Minister who was on TV being interviewed recently, they're worried about deflation.
No, that's a ruse. That's a straw man. And first of all, falling prices is a good thing.
No, prices fell by 25% between 1929 and 1932. That's one of the things that created the Great Depression.
Let's assume that there's a point at which, if the government simply increases currency, that there is a point where that could become inflationary. Let's assume that's the case. Then why isn't the issue then, if there is enough wealth in the society, either to pay for infrastructure investment or stimulus? It's not that America doesn't have the wealth. The money's there. Why not tax it at the upper levels and not go into debt, not create just print money, not create debt and crisis? Why not go where the money is?
Well, the money won't be there anymore. The tax rates are already very high. I said I'm already paying 50% tax, and you raise my taxes much more than that, I'm done. I'm not going to work at all. I have 125 employees. What if I just retire? Because I don't want. Because
we had in the 1950s and 1960s, we had top marginal tax rates of 90%, and the economy was sounder and
nobody paid those taxes because they had all kinds of deductions that don't exist.